Welcome to the In-Betwixt and In-Between. This is Leadership Limbo, a podcast aimed at helping leaders embrace the discomfort and power of leading themselves and others in the midst of it all. We blend real insight with practical tools to help you lead with self-awareness, purpose, and influence wherever you are on your leadership journey. Good morning to you, John.
Hey, Josh, how's it going today?
Oh, it's going pretty well. It's been a good week, a busy week here, and happy to be here with you this morning. And how about you? How is it going on your end?
Yeah, good. Thursdays are a busy day now. We record these on Thursday typically, and then it's the day where I take my kiddo to piano, or one of my kiddos to piano, and then the biggest thing for me is then we head to soccer practice where I'm the coach. And so you want to talk about lessons in management and leadership, get 7 or 8 6-year-olds on a field teaching them soccer when that wasn't the sport that I played growing up. No, I played for a little bit, but don't know that much about it. It's a lot of fun. We had our first game last week, but a lot of coaching around just, hey, follow the ball, make sure you keep running. You can't stop in the middle of the game to go get a drink of water, stuff like that. Pretty simple goals we're working on, but we are, having a lot of fun with that, but looking forward to that this afternoon. So we'll see how that goes. Coach John over here.
Love to be a fly on the wall or watching you from the sidelines. My question is, are you as passionate about the outcomes on that soccer field as you are about Notre Dame's football games? Like, what level of intensity are we talking about as Coach Clark?
I told my wife last week, because, they don't keep score, but we clearly lost. I told her, I said, the problem I have internally is that I'm very competitive, actually. And I've done it a lot over the years to kind of mute that so it doesn't come out in aggressive ways. But I was just like, I need the boys to at least compete. And so, I don't know, it stuck with me. And so that's why today we're just going to work on, all right, how do you just keep going after the ball? That's all I care about. I'd rather see them all crowding around the ball than last week. There was a lot of just, standing around. So
watching.
So yes, I think so. I think that's where I'm going to have to watch out how high in this I stay as a coach, because I could see my competitive streak coming out a bit. Anyway.
Yeah. Good luck to you.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm glad to be back today. Last week when we sat down together and shared with our listeners some homework, we wanted to come back to that and just kind of remind folks about where we left things. And we talked last week a lot about the shifts in identity that you experience as a leader. And really the homework was simply to ask yourself that question. When did you experience that shift in identity if you are a manager, a leader who is listening to this podcast? When did that happen? Why did that? What did that feel like? Why did it feel that way to you? But I think being aware of that and giving yourself permission to name it was the goal of that assignment in order for you to then be able to tap into the content that we're going to address today. And so without too much further ado, John, I wanted to pass it over to you, where you will be able to share with us an introduction to today's content.
Yeah. So today I think we want to keep the kind of a multi-episode theme here. So last week, again, we're talking about the shift in relationships because of your shifting identity, right? So we talked about that last week. So you move into a managerial spot and a lot changes, right? We went through some of the reasons that changes and why that's challenging. And today we want to take that to a pretty important relationship for you as a middle manager, which is the relationship with your manager, right? And what that looks like. And so actually, when we were talking about this, it framed for me, a lot of folks perhaps, and if you haven't, I would encourage you to check out an author named Patrick Lencioni. He's read a bunch of books. A lot of his thinking and thoughts are compiled in a book called The Advantage, but certainly there's many others. The 5 Dysfunctions of a Team, I think it's called Death by Meetings. So he's got a lot of good work. But one of the bigger frameworks that people know is kind of the 5 dysfunctions. And at the base of that is, on healthy teams, you have strong trust, right? And that really got me to think, like, when we talk about this relationship with managers and we talk about trust, I think often, even in ways that I've seen us digest that book or talk about it with leadership teams, it seems like it's framed in such a way that it starts with the head person only, right? To be, hey, what have you done to create the conditions for trust? What have you done to make trust happen on your team? And that's fair. Like, that's your job, right? So I want to name that. And if you're a mid-manager, you got to do that for your teams as well. But I think often enough, we don't talk about that. You have a responsibility as someone who is managed by others or who is a contributing member to a team to also build trust. And so I think a lot of today's conversation is, what are some things that have to happen from you as a middle manager right? As a member, a contributing member to a team, perhaps a senior team, to bring about the trust of that team as well, so it can become a high functioning team, right? And so we want to talk about that in a couple framings for today, since we're talking about your manager or someone who manages you. Number one, we're going to assume at some level that you and your boss have a pretty competent relationship, not maybe perfect, maybe not exemplary, but good enough, right? That there's progress that can be made. So we say that because a lot of times we can go into podcasts about this or discussions on this, and it becomes, well, my boss is toxic, or my boss would never allow me to do that, or whatever it might mean. Totally get that. But for the sake of our conversation, we're kind of assuming a little bit less like toxicity and a little bit more balance to that relationship. And two, we're talking to you as the mid-level leader about your role in that relationship. So we're not talking about your manager in the same way that we're this week not talking about you as the manager of your folks, right? And so it's really geared towards what do you have to do to play your role in that relationship, okay? And so we're going to get into the first part of this. I think it's two parts. One, we want to talk about the qualities of a healthy relationship with your own manager and kind of frame that. And then the second part is, I think, some strategies to help build that relationship when there are maybe some pitfalls that can occur, right? So we're going to let Josh take it away on a few of these, and then I'll do the rest of them. So Josh, why don't you get us into some of those healthy relationships with your own manager and what we think those qualities are?
Yeah, thanks, John. I appreciate the segue into this. And I think, yes, I mean, we know some of you are listening to this and you're like, manager is the exact opposite of competent and ideal to work with. And so future episodes, we will dive into that reality. But again, we're operating under some assumptions here. I think the first one is, I think, trust, right? Trust is an ideal quality and an ideal state of existence within any healthy relationship, let alone your manager, within your own family, with your peers. So trust, and I know that's like really big. There's books written about it. There's concepts that kind of underlie that. So I don't want to try to just throw out a single paradigm to explain what trust would be. But I will kind of break it down into the next level, which is the idea that there is the presence of what I would call a liberation or a liberating mindset and mentality between you and your manager. And I'm explaining that through a high support, high challenge concept. So one of the tools that comes from Giant, I use this, it's the high support, high challenge matrix. And so if you were to picture an ideal relationship between your employees as well as between you and your manager, the upper right quadrant would represent a space in which there's the presence of high support and high challenge. Now, to kind of build that out just a little bit more to say, okay, well, what if it's not in that upper right quadrant? What we're talking about is possibly a high challenge, low support environment, which might feel dominating. It might be a low support, low challenge environment, which might feel like an environment of abdication. And what's more common, in fact, is an environment in which there's a lot of support, but not a lot of challenge. And that might be a protection or a protective environment. And so when we think about an ideal quality to have in a managerial relationship with your own manager, you really want to have the elements of high support and high challenge present so that there can be a truly liberating atmosphere and culture and climate of leadership in that space.
In another framing, folks might know about that's similar is Radical Candor by Kim Scott. It goes through this as well when you talk about the high accountability, high support sort of framework. So another one people can look to as well.
Yeah, I think there's lots of different ways to think about it, and those are both excellent. I'll also give a little shout out here to a really good book that I'm still working through. Corey Shear writes a book called Closing the Trust Gap. I'd highly recommend it. It creates a really unique framework to kind of break down trust as well. So a shout out to Corey Shear of Trust Centric Consulting and also the book Closing the Trust Gap. We'll put a note in the comments for that. But I recently just began that book and I think there's a lot of really good stuff in that. I'd also throw out that another element of a productive relationship with your manager is going to be intentional two-way communication. So where there's consistent transmission and reception of information both ways. And so last week, I noted in our podcast the idea that communication is not simply talking and hearing. It means that the information that is being transmitted is received by the other person. And received does not simply imply they audibly heard what I said, but it was actually understood, internalized, maybe wrestled with. And so the quality of two-way communication is a real hallmark of an effective relationship between people in general. But again, in this particular paradigm that we're speaking about with your manager, ensuring that there is the transmission and receival of information going both directions. John,
Yeah.
what would you add to that?
Well, yeah,
Yeah.
when you're talking about that last one, I think especially since we're in the vein of talking to folks who are mid-level leaders about their responsibility in building that relationship with their manager. When I think about this communication thing, and you were talking about consistent transmission, and that the other person is hearing it, I think there can be often a lot of times when our communication with our managers is actually not as clear as we think it is. And I think
Mhm.
sometimes there's a few reasons for that. One, we might think that they're operating with context that they actually aren't. Just because they sit above us doesn't mean they know everything that you know. Or two, we get this sense of, well, because you're in the seat of power, it's up to you to kind of read between the lines. I've met many people who say, well, I said that to them. And I'm like, well, replay for me what you said or how you said it. And it was maybe a in passing sort of comment, or it was kind of vague, or it was generalized, or they kind of made a suggestion, but not really. They weren't pointed, right? They weren't direct. And so it is on you as well to make sure that you are supporting your manager, people who sit above you in the org chart, to truly understand your point of view, right? We're going to talk about managing up later, but I just really want to hit on that. When we talk about this, it's not two-way communication that the other person owns the majority of it. It's actually, how clear are you? And are you being direct? And are you being forthcoming? Or are you being vague or a little soft with the way you're communicating in a way that actually does not allow them to hear what you're saying? So, just something for you to think about your directness with your boss, right? Um, the next three qualities I want to talk about. The first one is just this idea of you have to think about, how can I, with my boss, have a healthy balance of autonomy and accountability? And you have to seek that, right? I think you have to be willing to be accountable to your boss for outcomes. You have to be willing to be accountable to them for the decisions that they make. You just have to have a little bit of submissiveness. You have to be okay with the idea of that this person's in their position and they have the right to kind of make sure that I'm doing things well. And I owe it to them to be accountable to them and to really share what I'm doing. And you also have to have a strong desire to be autonomous, to showcase that you can handle things individually, that you can tackle problems on your own, that you really can kind of move forward without constantly having to be in their ear asking them, like, are you okay with this? Getting that affirmation. There's a difference between being slightly submissive and understanding that you have to be accountable, and then also needing constant affirmation from them, right? And so you have to know that balance and be asking yourself all the time, am I being autonomous of this enough? Am I proving to my boss that I can handle it? And am I being accountable? Like, am I showcasing them results? Am I asking the right questions to make sure I'm not making decisions on my own that are unnecessary? And then the second one, we think, does come from your manager. The relationship requires them to believe in you. You want someone who believes in you, they believe in the role of multiplying and catalyzing your impact. We talked about that a few weeks ago, right? That they should be catalyzing your impact. And the biggest thing also about that is you have to believe in them. So I don't think sometimes that we think about it as a two-way street. We don't talk about, are you showing belief in your manager? Are you showing belief in their decisions? Are you willing to go to bat for things that they're asking of the company? Are you trying to learn their perspective on things? Too often it's just, oh, I'm just here to get marching orders from my boss. I don't really like what they're telling me, but that's not building that relationship. It creates that distance. So you have to believe in them and be willing to challenge directly. Don't get me
Right.
wrong. When there's time, you have to
Right.
do that, but it has to come from a place of belief and wanting to get it right. And then the last one, I alluded to this a moment ago. You have to remind yourself that your part in this relationship is to manage up. They need to know what you're seeing on the ground floor. They need to know what you're seeing from your team. They need to know how the employees below you are engaged in the work, or if they're not, why not, so that the two of you can build like a collaborative process to make people more engaged and bought into what you're doing. You have to advocate for what your team needs, assuming it fits in with the organizational goals and the vision of the company. But if you're thinking with that in mind, as we talked about vision a few weeks ago, then you're going to ask for the right things. You're going to advocate for the right, tools and processes for your team, and your boss will likely get more involved, but that's up to you to manage that relationship up so that they feel confident that when you come asking for things or showcasing or sharing a point of view, that they know it's coming from a right spot. So,
Mm.
a lot there to unpack, but I think certainly those highlight some of the biggest elements of a healthy relationship between you and your manager. Josh,
Yeah.
thoughts?
No, I mean, I think that's well said, and it's a nice segue into this next section here, which is going to get us into a little bit about how do we avoid the pitfalls that might happen in this relationship and in these relationships. And I think a lot of that starts with being intentional about understanding what the quality should look like, and then starting to become a little bit more curious about maybe my current relationship is a little bit, short of what we just discussed, or maybe it's significantly away from what we just discussed. And I think what you just shared is kind of the first pitfall, which is maybe the inability or the lack of consistency in what we would call kind of this managing up. And I think there's a few ways or a few reasons this might happen. And so the first pitfall, I'm going to actually frame more around a mindset as
Yeah.
opposed to a systematic reason for not managing up. John will get to that in a minute. But I think the mindset is it's not a little bit, in fact, it's a lot about what you were just sharing, John, which is this idea of you have to see yourself as an important person at the table. You have to have this mentality, this positionality mindset that
Yeah.
you're valued in the role that you have, that you and your manager now are responsible for the performance, well-being, fulfillment, and success of a lot of different people. And so again, if you're in the position of having moved from an individual contributor to this managerial role, that power dynamic has shifted in a few ways, and one of which is that you too need to see yourself as somebody who can bring effective support and challenge with your manager as well. And you mentioned the word kind of submission earlier, John, is like, yeah, I think at times there's the reality of a hierarchy, and that there's, I think that the term, I'm blanking on the term that you might hear in the military, but there's a standard operating procedures for who and how and when decisions get made. And yes, sometimes you are not the decision maker and you will not make that decision. But there's also a real value in seeing yourself as a person of value and importance at that table with your manager. And bringing that mentality in, I think, is the first step of believing that you have the tools and in many cases, the need to be able to manage up
Yeah.
about concerns that you are seeing, that you carry that sense of authority, that sense of ownership into this space, because your manager is also going to be looking at you to kind of take that degree of ownership. So believe you belong.
Yeah, I mean, I'm struck by that. Thinking back a few weeks, and you led us on a discussion about when we have a difficult time with the vision, it might be out of self-preservation tendencies, like fear of actually executing on it, or your ability to do that. And I think sometimes, to your point about this mindset, we sometimes have a fear of, well, if I kind of put myself out there and if I communicate in the way that I know I need to, can that backfire on me? Like, there's a vulnerability to that. So certainly I think that goes back to a lot of what you said there. So the second pitfall is just the system of communication breakdown. Do we have the systems in place to do it? So Josh, again, is that mindset, the internal work of how I communicate and with what authority do I communicate? But this one is, what is leading to me either over communicating, like never making a firm decision, always going to my boss for everything, under communicating, or not even knowing how to communicate, right? What's leading to that? And again, we know all of this is a two-way street, but we're encouraging you to think about what your role is and with that, with your boss, right? And so the first thing that we would offer as a suggestion is, one, have a framework for how you make decisions. Okay. And so I had a boss early on, Evan McBoy. One of the first things he taught me that I've stuck with ever since was he basically told me when I came on as kind of an assistant principal to him, was, hey, I really want you to have this framework of what's called like a red, yellow, green light sort of thinking. So start developing basically, hey, green light, I'm good to go on this decision. I feel confident about it. Stefan will be on board with it. It's good for the school. It's in alignment with our mission, vision. No need to check in. Yellow light is more of that, I think I know what I want to do here, but I better double check with my boss and a few other people to make sure that we're feeling good about it. Red light is full stop. We got to stop right now. I got to get answers right away. I'm not quite sure what decision to make, and it's going to have pretty significant impact if I don't check in with folks. And so that red, yellow, green light, and we'll talk about that a little bit more later, but having that framework in your brain about when do I need to communicate with my manager. And then you just really need to look at what is the communication cadence with my manager, right? So that can be anything from determining, hey, how effective are our one-on-one meetings? I shared a resource on LinkedIn this week about one-on-one templates that I've used and have been developed, not by myself, but with others over the years. So that's one thing to check out. But just number one, what do the meetings look like? What are we accomplishing? And then how consistent are those? And then what other touch points do we have? Like, you don't only need to talk during the one-on-one. It can be a quick check-in here, a standing 10-minute check-in here. Sometimes I've been in places where it was important for me to, at the end of the week, communicate out some key things that happened this week that I want them to know about, just so they have a line of sight on it, right? Not to get to Doge and Elon Musk here with list the 5 things you did to your manager this week, but it did help me at times when there were complex processes to let people know and my boss to see what we were doing. So just be thinking about what are my systems of communicating. If you don't have them in place, start developing ideas with your boss about ways that you can have better two-way communication just because of the systems that are set up.
Yeah, I think that's great advice. So it's always that intersection of the internal work, the thinking, but also the system. You have to have that to kind of back this up. The next pitfall to talk about quickly would be around, I think, John, you kind of coined this phrase of like the "what have you done for me lately" mentality that can sometimes
Mhm.
exist when there is a power dynamic. And I want to be very clear. We are talking about there is a power dynamic. You have a superior and you are not that person. There is the reality that there is a relationship of power that we need to be mindful of here. And as John shared and as we're encouraging, you too have power and you still have the ability to take full control and ownership over how you show up, how you engage, and avoiding yourself feeling like there's a victim mentality, right? Like, I'm not saying that you're necessarily an equal in terms of decision making or power, but you also do need to show up in a way that gives you that sense of kind of what I talked about a little bit earlier, that sense of confidence that you belong. And I think that the way I would kind of add on to that a little bit differently is if you're struggling to work with your manager because of challenges that exist, and you also are responsible for the people on your team, if you cannot lead yourself through that challenging and that situation, if you cannot lead yourself and model the way of how you are trying to navigate complexities with your own manager, how do you think the people you lead are going to be able to
Yep.
do that if you can't even lead yourself?
Yep.
So I think the real challenge here is to
Right.
say you need to be able to first lead yourself through these complex situations with your manager if you're going to expect your team to do the same thing.
Yep.
I'll
That's
turn it
the
back to you. I know that
yeah.
yeah.
Well, I mean, yeah, that's one of the things that's so unique about mid-level management and leadership is when you see things playing out in one direction between you and the way you work with your manager, there's a good chance that you're going to see that play out in the way it fits with you, right? So if you're thinking with my boss, like, what have you done for me lately? You didn't do this work, or you didn't have a role in it, or you barely knew what I was doing, and maybe that's an assumption you're making. There's a good chance the folks that you manage are also thinking that about you, right? So just
Right.
be careful. Be careful. You reap what you sow, sort of situation, right? So
Mhm.
last
Right.
pitfall we want to talk about is waiting to be developed by your manager. You hear this a lot, like, and this is a big one. It's one, well, they're just not developing me well enough, or they don't have a plan for how they want to develop me or what they want. And I think obviously managers have a role in putting something together, but would also note that a lot of development actually occurs from your own work, right? What are you putting into that? And how are you communicating your development desires to your boss? Like, hey, I really want to grow in this area. Are you spending most of your time just talking about all the great things you're doing so you think they'll like that? Or are you having the courage to say, look, this is a skill of mine that I know I need work on and I want to develop it. I'd like your help in that. And I'd like to show you some ways that I'm working on it and get you feedback on it. Right. And
Mhm.
so one is, people have probably heard of the 70-20-10 model, perhaps like 70% of your development comes from what you do. I think it's 20%. I'm going to mix this up. I want to say 20% might come from what you read and what learning you do. I might be mixing these two
I
up.
think that's the
Yeah.
opposite.
So 20% comes from like your manager and
Yeah.
their development of you in the meetings. And then 10% comes from like readings you do and things like that. Right. So the point is the vast majority of your development comes from your own work and your recognition of in the moment, like, oh, I'm learning something here and I'm developing here. Right. And so you can actually increase that that process with your boss by using your weekly meetings as an example to say, hey, I know this is one of my goals. I want to talk to you about a way that I saw development in this week, or, oh, I had a challenge that I think fits in with my goal. I'd like to talk you through. And so then your development becomes more of a weekly cadence versus you do it twice a year at your mid and end of year reviews. Just again, what are you doing to promote your own development and then use your boss or your manager as a sounding board versus waiting back and saying like, all right, develop me, let's go. Right. So
Right.
just something I think that's an enormous thing that people often don't think about that you can do and actually set your manager up to actually develop you well because they see what you're putting into it. So,
Yeah. I
Josh,
wanna
thoughts on that before getting into our exercises for next week?
Yeah, I think what I'm gathering and taking away from this conversation is that you do need to bring in a real sense of ownership and conscientiousness in your role
Yeah.
and take control of what you can control. Don't just wait. We want to leave you with a couple of tools that might be helpful reflections for this week. So the first would be a two-way communication audit. So pretty simple exercise. Evaluate the level of communication between your manager and you. And again, thinking of communication as, are what I transmit, are the ideas I transmit received? And are the ideas that they transmit to me received? And if it's not a 10, figure out where that gap might be and pick one thing to work on this week to be able to make that improve. The second exercise opportunity would be to think about picking a current project that you are working on and using that red, yellow, and green concept that John shared earlier, and write down the decisions that are getting made in that project and categorize those decisions under red, yellow, or green. And as you map that out, you might very quickly identify an opportunity space to say, well, shoot, a lot of these are sitting under the green, or under the yellow, under the red. I'd like to see maybe some more movement towards creating a little more autonomy in this relationship. So how do you identify it first and then be able to have the conversation? So pick one of those two, maybe do both this week. And again, as we always say, leave a comment. Let us know how that exercise goes for you. And we hope it helps.
Share your tools on how you're working with your boss and what you've done to leverage and strengthen that relationship, right? We want to build a lot of capacity in you to do that. We don't want to just create a podcast that says, hey, sit back and wait for your boss to do a good job managing you, right? So excited to see how people do that. So with that said, as we said at the beginning, please download our podcast wherever you get podcasts. Would love a 5-star rating and leave a review. Not something you have to do, but we'd love to see reviews, both of what's quality about this, and leave comments wherever you can get a hold of us, email, LinkedIn, other places. We'd love to hear how you're engaging with the podcast. Please share broadly, give it to folks who you think might use this, might be good for their leadership teams or if they're new managers. And until next time, good friends, this has been Leadership Limbo, where we make space for the tension and tools for the journey. See you in the in-between.